this suffering has forced me to acknowledge that I can't save myself. I can't save her. I am in need of help. I like really needed Jesus in the here and now to help me get through every single day. That's all too much for me. But praise the Lord, I've gotten to suffer with him and choosing to acknowledge that his presence is actually with me, actually inside of me, and I'm not alone in this. I can actually suffer with him. And he knows a thing or two about suffering, so it's a a pretty beautiful thing that, the God of all comfort can comfort me, and then I can turn around and comfort others. Like, it makes a
Wow.
huge difference.
I thought we'd start with this, Jim. Celebration, a topic of celebration. And anyone who maybe even read the title of today's podcast or knows any of your story, which we're going to get into, it would be like, why would you start with that of all topics, celebration? But the dad life in so many ways can feel like we're this or that or this. There's so many reasons to not celebrate. And I think I think you're a perfect person to ask this question to. Why is celebration key for dads?
Wow. Okay, that's a super good question. As we'll get into in my story, there's just been a lot of suffering, a lot of what I call expectation gaps. We all have hopes and expectations for career, for marriage, for parenting, for life.
Right.
And often reality comes in underneath that. And that gap between reality and what we hope for is full of disappointment and dissatisfaction and distress. And I hate that. Like, I've experienced copious amounts of expectation gaps, and every single time I'm stuck in the gap, there's an invitation to take myself too seriously. Like, woe is me. This is awful. I hate it. Like, I want to cope.
Sure.
Whatever. And I love Richard Foster's book, The Celebration of Discipline. Like, that has been kind of a cornerstone book in my life, where he says at the end that celebration is the thing that can save us from taking ourselves too seriously.
Yes.
And I think the Christian life is about not taking ourselves too seriously, being humble, being meek, being others focused, serving others. And in all of my gaps, man, I'm just inward focused,
It's
like,
true.
this sucks. I hate this. But if I can learn to celebrate, even in the midst of the biggest gap, man, it takes the sting away, right? Like,
Yes.
I can begin to have some perspective that, seems just absurd, but I've just found like ways to celebrate, simple as just like getting that blizzard,
Yeah.
with my
Yeah.
son, whatever, to like going on that big trip to see, the Packers at Lambeau, or like just
Yes.
doing something to like, celebrate the season. I just it really it's made a huge difference in my life.
I was thinking about asking you to get practical, and then you gave me a few. The big, the
Yeah,
trip,
yeah,
and the small, the blizzard that they hand you upside down. I'm like, yes, it
that's
sounds
good.
delicious right now.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, I can walk into a room with a thing of Tic Tacs and be like, just make up a reason of like, let's celebrate for a moment. And all my daughters and my wife is just like,
Yeah.
you can like, there's so many small practical ways, but how often I'm trying to think of like the ingredients that would help, or like what would help a dad remember to celebrate and realize how easy it is to celebrate. So a few that come to my mind are like community, when we have friends, when we have like you could think about ahead of time, there's something to celebrate about that friend and help them, nudge them towards celebration, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And then where you food, we mentioned food as a couple examples, Tic Tacs and blizzards,
yeah.
trips. What else comes
Uh-huh.
to mind for just practical ways to stir up more celebration?
Man, like with my son, I will it's easy to be like negative or critical, like, you're doing it wrong, like, do it like this. I was standing over my son's shoulder the other day as he was doing his math homework, and he's about to turn 14. And so the math's getting a little bit harder than I know
Yeah.
how to
Yeah.
deal with. And as he was doing it, I was starting to figure it out, and he was kind of messing it up. And I wanted to be critical. I wanted to like jump in and be like, "No, you're doing it wrong. Stop it," But um, I let him do it, and he's like, "Oh, the wrong answer," because it's all online, and it'll give you that instant gratification of an answer.
Sure.
And I was like, "Oh man, dude, you get to do it again? Like, are you kidding? This is so much
You
fun."
celebrate the opportunity. Yes.
Yeah, just trying to have a different tact. I think it's good for me, but undoubtedly good for him, right? Like, he already feels the pressure of getting it right. And like that next day we got out in the backyard and threw the football around and just had some fun. And the two weren't correlated, but I just
Yep.
being present in the moment and like finding the thing to smile about. There's so many things to frown about, man. Like,
Yeah.
um, but it's just not healthy. It's not good. We got to find the moments.
And both are contagious.
Yeah.
Celebration and frowning. They're both
Oh my gosh.
contagious.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh,
Like it begats each other, right?
yeah. So you brought up expectation gaps, and we're going to talk about that theme probably in and out of all of your story, because it's so true. In all of our story have these gaps. We recently, I can't actually recall who I was chatting with on this podcast about, when your child is born, you become a dad the first time. And
Yeah.
actually, in so many ways, it is a marker moment of celebration. Your community celebrates you. You post something on, it'll be your most liked photo on Facebook if you happen to post it, right? It's like
Yeah.
there's celebration, but really, becoming a dad has all kinds of layers of loss, of grief. It's just like and we went through, I won't rehash it now, but there's so many
Yeah.
layers of you lose freedom, you lose time, you lose money, you lose connection with your wife, you lose this flexibility, you lose sleep, you lose, and it's so funny that actually we celebrate something, and then we almost like forget to keep celebrating because of all this loss, all this expectation
Oh
gaps, right?
man. Yes,
Yeah, what would
absolutely.
you add into that concept of like, man, celebration, we got to keep it going, and that is the reality of becoming a dad.
Yeah. What would I add into that list? I mean, it's a pretty exhaustive list like that. You pretty well nailed that. I think dreams, right? Like there are things that I have wanted to accomplish in my life, and I feel like some of those I've had to punt on, right?
Sure.
Like someday Anderson will go to college, and maybe that's the time I can do
Yeah.
this or do that. Yeah, I think that's something we sacrifice or lose pretty easily. Yeah,
Yeah, I think the dad dashboard of like, I want to do more of this and less of this, and
yeah,
celebration is for sure on my list of I want to celebrate more. If it also sparks shiny eyes, and that's what I want for my girls, for my wife. I want when I
yeah,
enter a room, I want when I'm engaging even a difficult problem or a moment of pain, to can I
yeah.
help their eyes shine more? Well, what's a tool for that for all of us dads? Celebration. I mean, it
Yes,
really is. It's truly a
yeah,
tool. And there's different rhythms of the day. It could be leaving for school, returning from school, dinner moments. We do high low buffalo, and the buffalo stories are the silly, crazy, unexpected things from their day. Like these are
yeah,
celebrations waiting to happen if you pounce on them and celebrate them when they're shared, right? There's even that. It's like, how do we respond as dads? Do we celebrate, or do we just go to the next thing? Okay, what's your next thing on your high low buffalo?
yeah.
So yeah, I
That's
know I'm
so
just
good. Yeah, Jeff,
we're
I'd
just
say like
spitballing.
we do that at our house. We don't do the buffalo.
Yeah,
Never
yeah,
knew about that. I'm going to incorporate that. But uh, I find that Anderson, like probably your girls do this. It's like, yeah, this happened or that happened, and it's like
mhm,
whatever. And it's like a quick little nugget that
sure, sure,
means it feels very insignificant. But man, I try to jump on that stuff, whether it's the good or the bad. Like, hold on, wait, tell me more. Like, I
mhm,
want to know more. That investment feels like celebration of like even if it's like the hard thing, like, hold on, wait, but you responded this other way. Like, that's really awesome that you know talked to that bully that was giving you a hard time, but you handled it so well. Like that was a bad moment, but you crushed it.
Yes. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. And pouncing on in the best kind of affirming way as dads responses and monotonous answers, or just kind of like nah, there's not much emotion there. Well, let's dive in a little deeper. That's such a
Yeah.
great practical thing. I thought
Yeah.
just going back into your story, it's the gift of story. It's
Yeah.
wild to me how rarely I'll ask somebody, "Hey, tell me more about your story," and then just give them the time to kind of like, oh my goodness, the amount I can learn through hearing someone else's story, what they've walked through, what they've experienced. I've had the I've had the gift of I know some of your story because of your book
Mm.
that you've like that is a gift. Truly, it'll be linked out in the show notes. And even this your second book, Made Alive, like this to me of like wrapping into the core of what makes you live fully alive and makes our faith actually not be a settled faith, but a like, let's, oh my goodness, look what God has created. So
Yeah.
love these two books, grateful for, and they'll be linked out in the show notes. But I wanted to just like, let's go back. Let's go back to 2006, I believe, because I think we were married
Yeah.
the same year.
That's right.
Uh, the the first main expectation gap that you actually there was even let's go back a step beyond before that to your
Mm.
parents and as a child kind of what you experienced growing up. Could you take
Mm.
us into a few of these expectation gaps and
Yeah.
what God has taught you along the way?
Yeah. Yeah, man. I'm glad you asked. So, yeah, childhood was rough for me. I grew up in a really broken home. There was just a lot of chaos in my house that was ripe. I don't know what else to say. It was
Mhm.
just, it was hard. And my parents finally got divorced when I was in sixth grade, but there were seasons of separation. You know, my dad traveled a lot. My mom struggled with mental illness. And there's just a lot in that. And when they finally got divorced, there was so much grief and so many like traumatic moments that happened all at once. And I didn't know how to handle it. I honestly didn't. I had no concept. I had never seen grief handled before. And, I was stuck at home with my mom who was dealing with her own grief. My siblings were all older and out of the house. My dad had moved out, was just kind of stuck there. All I knew about myself is that I hated how I felt and I didn't want anyone to know. So I shut down. I became a selective mute. I like literally didn't talk on a
Mm,
given day's basis. If I could avoid it, right? Like if a teacher would call on me, I would certainly, respond with as few
mm,
words as possible. I didn't want to be rude, but outside of that, just never talking. I was a really like the only way I can describe it is I was a depressed kid. I would literally hang out not just in my bedroom, I would hide in my closet, and the closet became a great analogy for depression.
mm,
And that went on for a few years. And thankfully, I met Jesus, and Jesus changed everything for me. Um, you know, was able to step out of a depression closet and begin to participate with people in community and, grew up to be the class clown and, all that in high school and stuff. And I remember being so grateful for what the Lord had done in my life at that point, because without him, I don't know how I would have navigated out of it. I think I was stuck,
yeah,
which, kind of to transition into the more like
mm,
modern part of the story is when I got married to my amazing wife, Alicia, we had no idea what was coming. And, 3 months into our married life, she got really sick. Like everything fell apart. She's got this weird chronic illness that we had no idea about. It's called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a connective tissue disorder. For some people, it's like in their joints, they're like contortionists and they can bend
wow,
their joints in any direction. For her, it's mainly in her abdomen. And so there's like no muscle tone in her digestive system pushing food through. All
mm,
of her core organs had prolapsed or fallen out of place. She now has cow tissue and meshing and tacks, trying to keep things where they're supposed to be.
mm,
But when it all fell apart, Jeff, like I didn't know what to do. I
mm,
think that grief is a habit. And my grieving habit was to shut down, to isolate, was to step into a depression closet. And so that's what I started to do at that point. Alicia was up at the Mayo Clinic for 3 months, trying to get some, legitimate help for all this stuff. And I couldn't be with her most of that time. It was just like such a crazy time. I just was over my skis. I didn't know what to do. And thankfully I was part of a community, a church community that knew me and loved me. And they were like, man, you're not alone. Like
Yeah.
we're gonna be in this with you. We're gonna experience victory together. And they held my arms up when I was weak and weary. And it really made a difference in my life. So it's just kind of the contrast between the two. It felt really good to not be alone and to, not have to choose that isolated closet.
So, and I've really appreciated learning about how your friends, the thread of friendships through, I mean, this entire 18, yeah, roughly 18-year journey, since that first kind of not even diagnosis, first like suffering moment of this is not what we expected. And I know there's been so many ups and moments of like we think we're on to healing, and then downs, and feeling like even the loss from like medical professionals steering you guys in a
Yeah.
direction that was so hurtful and so harmful. And and just through, what are some of the threads of that helped sustain you guys? Community, you mentioned, was one, and we'll get into
Yeah.
even deeper into the story. But like, what are some of the other pieces that you look back and you're like, oh, that was part of what helped us get through.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how anyone does this life without Jesus. Like this life's too hard. How do we do this without him? I would say, to paint the picture more clearly, my wife has like sufficiently gone downhill, like ever since getting sick. Like she has lost tons of weight and capacity. She's, can't drive, she can't work, she's on disability. Like it has been incredibly hard. And it's forced me, this suffering has forced me to acknowledge that I can't save myself. I can't save her. I am in need of help. Obviously we are all in need of a savior, but I like really needed Jesus in the here and now to help me get through every single day. I mean, she has spent hundreds of nights in the hospital. She's had dozens of surgeries. She's essentially died on me twice. I've held her lifeless body in my arms twice. And that's all too much for me. But praise the Lord, I've gotten to suffer with him and not be alone. Obviously, community is part of that, but just choosing to acknowledge that his presence is actually with me, actually inside of me, and I'm not alone in this. I can actually suffer with him. And he knows a thing or two about suffering, so it's a a pretty beautiful thing that, the God of all comfort can comfort me, and then I can
Yes.
turn around and comfort others. Like it makes a
Wow.
huge difference.
And I know dreams, many of the dreams that you thought would be the case in the first 18 years of marriage and family have not been realized, these dreams. One of the dreams around being parents, you were told with absolute, like, you cannot and should not, and it will, your wife could die, the baby could die if something like, would you tell us that story? And because I think the dad life has entered in different ways for, and there's been I've so many amazing miracle stories about dads that are holding their babies or have their kids now, and we're told it was impossible. But I think your story will just bring so much hope. So could you share the story about?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I would love to. It is crazy. We had wanted to become parents really badly, and we had seen, I swear, every specialist in town just trying to figure out, how does this work? Is it possible? And every doctor said the same thing: impossible to get pregnant and super impossible for you to carry a pregnancy. Just, it's not going to work. And we had a friend who offered to be our surrogate. And we had never considered that before, just never really hit our, thought of process. And like, okay, like, is that weird? Is that cool? Like, how should we feel about that? So we had gone to see one of these doctors that told us, no, you should not consider this. And we knew he was a believer. And so we wanted to ask him the moral implications of surrogacy. Like, is this something that God would frown upon? Is this okay? Like, you're not the judge and jury,
Right.
but help us think it through,
Right.
So he starts defending why he loves surrogacy and he doesn't feel like it's sinful, and he's defending his case. And then
Mhm.
Jeff, suddenly he just stops talking. Like, it's almost like he's like drifting off into another world. And I'm like, Dr. DeRosa, are you having a stroke? Like, are
Right.
you
Yeah.
okay? I can call 911. I can get someone, right? And uh, he suddenly kind of snaps back too, and he's like, I, I'm so sorry. I feel like God is telling me to tell you something, and it's the last thing I want to tell you, but I have to be obedient. I think you need to die to this dream. I think you need to give up the dream of having a child. Now, if you want to push forward, please let me be your doctor. I'm not going to judge you. I really care about you guys, but I had to be obedient to tell you. And when he said that, it it was like a zap inside of Alicia and I. And we're like, okay, like that is so painful to hear, but that is from the Lord. Like, we knew unequivocally that was, from God. And so we broke down. We like go out into this busy hospital and have like somehow 5 minutes alone in an empty elevator. And we just break down. We're crying. We're like upset, but also like relieved. Like, God wasn't the answer we wanted, but it was the answer he was giving us. And so we're like, okay, we'll do that. We'll be the best aunts and uncles we can be. And it's okay. We'll trust you, Lord. And then that night she gets pregnant, and it was unbelievable. I didn't believe it. I was equal parts excited and terrified, right?
Yeah.
Because like, what is happening? Like, we gave up. It was almost like having to climb up the mountain with your beloved son, and like, you hold the knife up, and I'm like, all right, like I killed that dream,
Mhm.
and now you give it to me? Like, what? And God did a miracle, Jeff. There's no two ways around it. Like, Alicia got healthier during her pregnancy. She could actually eat and was actually able to put on weight. And she wasn't able to carry this pregnancy to full term. She got to almost 32 weeks of 40. But we've got this little boy who was born super tiny, 3 pounds, 14 ounces. I
Oh.
could hold him in my
Oh.
two hands. Like, he was just adorable. And it's like, he was so compromised. He had to spend like 26 days in the NICU, which
Mm.
was brutal. But I remember praying over him, praying over Anderson as he's just like so tiny. And I'm like, Lord, this makes no sense to me. Why would you give me this gift? I know perfectly healthy people you haven't given this gift to. But the only way this makes sense is you must have a calling for this kid's life. So help me be a good dad, that he would know you as Heavenly Father, and that he would be prepared for whatever it is that you're calling him into. And God met me in this little hospital room, Jeff. Like,
Mm.
it really was nuts. It was palatable. God, for years, as Alicia's getting sicker and sicker, was, poking at me and revealing things about maybe I
Yeah.
should go into ministry.
Mhm.
And I was like, there's no way. Like, look at the complicated life you've given me. I think ministry's complicated. There's no way I'm not going to do it. Like, it's just too much. I would give God the Heisman stiff arm.
Yeah.
And when God met me in this room, he's like, all right, well, what if in 20 or 30 years from now, I come to Anderson, and it doesn't matter if he's got a good excuse or a bad excuse. If he were to tell me no about going into ministry, how would you feel as his earthly dad? And was crushed. Like, wow, what a guilt trip. That's amazing. Like, okay, God, I would be disappointed. disappointed as how that's the only answer. And God disappeared and let me sit in that disappointment until I finally relented and said, fine, what, where, how, answer the stupid questions, and I'll just stink and do this already. And that's when God sent us out of our amazing community and moved us from St. Louis to Denver for me to go to seminary. And it was awesome to be able to ski, but everything else was miserable. But I had to be faithful to it. You know,
Mm.
God had called me out, and I wasn't sure what he was sending me into, but I knew I had to model this for my son, who, you know, could barely eat or sleep or like, you know, breathe at that point, but I had to model it. Yeah, it, it's
Wow.
nuts.
I mean, modeling obedience in the your child is too young to even know that you're modeling obedience, but the seeds are planted, and
Mhm.
the story is written that he now knows as an almost 14-year-old. But
Yeah.
the layers of change from friends leaving friends to the church you were a part of to
Mhm.
the pre-dad life. So you don't have a little one, now you have a little one, and then adding seminary to it.
Mm.
Like that's a lot. And then in
Yeah.
that journey, there was another negative turn for, yeah, for your wife's health, and like just raising your son while caring for your wife. Mean, it's so hard to even like ask questions because it feels like there's, how is that even possible?
Mm.
Would you tell us a little bit about that chapter and that journey of kind of young raising your son while trying to navigate medical help?
Oh my gosh, there was so much that we were juggling all at the same time, you know, getting my master's degree part-time, working full-time, really full-time plus, because I swear the enemy would just punk me and I would have to stay late at work almost every day because some debacle would happen and it was miserable. And, you know, Alicia's pretty limited and Anderson needs a dad and his dad's off doing who knows what, you know, and just that juggling act was really hard. And um, Alicia ended up, I think the story that you're referring to is she had gotten like an MRI or a CAT scan or something one day, and the doctor called us up just a few minutes after the test happened. Like typically, it takes 24 hours to read the results, and the doctor called right back and was like, "Hey, you need to go to the hospital. You are in trouble." And so we were like, okay, we'll go there. And it was kind of nice to have a day off from work to take her to the appointment. And so we were kind of chilling at a restaurant at the point. And so that phone call came in. And then, like a minute later, a phone call came in saying, "Hey, Anderson has double pink eye at preschool. And so you need to come and pick him up." And I'm like, what in the world is happening? Like all of this is crashing down. And that season, Alicia was in real trouble. It's one of the two times where she nearly essentially died on me. Um, there's just so much happening, and I had to go on FMLA to try to keep things together for myself, for my family. I don't know, man. Like that was a really low point where I had no idea what I was doing. Like I could not tell you which direction was up at that point. And thank goodness I was able to get that, 90 days off of work. And God changed everything. Literally on the 90th day, He provided a job at a church that was going to be better work-life balance for me, and it was going to send me in a trajectory that I couldn't have guessed. And it was, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question,
Yeah.
but that was, it's hard to relive almost to think about.
Wow. Jim, our two conversations we've had the chance to just connect over the phone and now through the video screen.
Mhm.
I read this quote. So I'll read a quote that I think is word for word, but sometimes when I voice note while I'm reading books, they mess up a little. So correct me if it's off. But
Yeah.
this idea of where you're at today and what you're doing and how you've encouraged me and how you're leading and coaching and helping couples and helping men, like
Mm.
with knowing your backstory does not like there's no way you get from here to here. Like it just like that to me feels like those are two different people. And I know you're still like this is not an overcoming posture, but like you haven't overcome like you're still in this journey of trust and the unknowns. And but this is I think this was you. Maybe it was somebody else wrote this. It said our brains need stories of how others have flourished within their constraints so that we might know our own hard stories can be the ones of flourishing too. Was that you or someone writing about you? Do you remember?
Man, I want to take credit for it because that's a great quote. Um, that might have been Jay Wolf,
Writing
of
about
Hope Healed.
you.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a perfect segue actually. Okay, so that
Yes.
that alone is just like that's power. I needed your story over the last week here, like because
Yeah.
I've heard your story over the last week. We've only known each other that long. Our
Mhm.
brains need stories of how others have flourished within their constraints so that
Mhm.
we're on earth. We're not in heaven. We all have constraints.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so we might know our own hard stories can be the ones of flourishing too. I see you in so many ways flourishing and helping others flourish. And that's
Mm.
what I just want to like speak into and encourage and say, that's only God. How would you respond to the quote? And then also, would you talk for a moment about Jay Wolf?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a big believer in story. I think story is our greatest gift. It's an unbelievable tool that we can use for evangelism or just building trust with each other. I think we do well when we lean on the power of story. And certainly, God didn't give me the story I wanted. I would have loved almost any other story, honestly. But it's the story He's been writing in my life, and I am in the middle of it. I'm not at the completion. I'm not. I can't put a pretty bow on it. I feel like I'm in a really healthy place, and I'm getting to serve others and all that. But yeah, this is still a story that is unfolding. But it's the story that God's given me, and I gotta use it. And man, I hope people listening to this are reflecting about their own story. I hear so many people say, man, I don't have that good of a story, or I don't like my story, I don't want to share it. I don't think it's optional, honestly. I think authenticity is required of the Christian walk. And so in using my story, I've been able to help people. You know, I run this coaching ministry now called Tiller Coaching, where I help other people who are stuck in their expectation gaps simply by using, certainly my experience of who God is and the scriptures and, a lot of truth, but also my own experience. I serve others through my own expectation gap. And the most amazing part of that, Jeff, is that it helps me overcome my own expectation gap. Like I hate all of this stuff that's in my story, but it is it's a privilege. Like I actually have gratitude for the story that I'm in. I get to sit with people in this office right here and see their lives transformed, and fruit happening in their life because they're getting authentic about their story, and they're inviting me in as part of their community to, like, I get to walk with them in their hurt and help them learn to trust Jesus. And it's amazing. So to answer the part about Jay Wolf, like maybe that's like the first time that I had even heard the concept of your story is powerful.
Mm,
Um, because him and his wife, Catherine Wolf, they have a really unbelievably hard story, and they have leveraged it for um, many years now, and have this unbelievable suffering ministry called Hope Heals. And they're just kind of heroes to me. And we've gotten to know them a little bit. And their inspiration is I think bigger than they could even begin to guess. Like I have watched them get dumped on by people, just like, here's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Here's all of my suffering. And they just cry with these people and they hold their hands and they pray for them. And I'm like, I don't want to do that, but I think I have to do that. And I'm so glad that I've learned to do that in this context of tiller coaching.
I've already in the last week connected two other dads to tiller, and I made up an answer for one of them about, well, what is it exactly? I kind of made up an answer, and it turns out you told me later I was pretty right on. But
Yeah.
the heartbeat of, instead of wait to what is perceived arrival, or perceived I'm on the other side of my challenge or my suffering or my, and then help other people. You've made a choice prayerfully. I know it's been prayerful to, right now. You're still in the young dad, teenage, early teenage phase with your
Mm-hmm.
wife who, I mean, Alicia is in a spot where, in so many ways, the world would say, don't do any serving others. Just get a job that requires as little bit of your brain as possible so that you can give all of your care on the home front. In some people's story, that might be exactly what God's leading them to do. So there's no harm, like nothing wrong in that.
Absolutely.
But you've chosen, and I see such life. Like I see like your eyes, the way you like talk and share, and like the power
Mm.
of, you're living a better story today for you, for your story, by serving others than by just serving on the home front, your own family. How did you like? How do you help people weigh out that decision though? Is now a circle the wagons focus, or is there always a level of, we live it and we can help others along the way? What's your take on that?
Yeah, man, there's such a tension in all of that. Yeah, people were actually really critical of me in a lot of this stuff. Like, you guys are going to seminary, like, you're spending all that time and money and energy, and you're walking away from community that you need. Like, that's, you can't do that. I'm like, oh, I would love to not do that, but I just have to, like, God's been too clear for me not to. When I started Tiller, I was working in a church here in Denver, and I wasn't like making a ton of money, obviously, working at a church, but I was making a paycheck every single week. And then God like changed everything and pulled me into like leaving the church and starting this coaching ministry. And I was so fuzzy about what it was, but I wasn't going to give God the Heisman stiff arm anymore. And so he's giving me all this stuff. And he actually like was very clear. Do not charge people for this. Like, this is coaching without barriers. There's no fee, there's no fear, there's no excuses. Like, give it away to people. And I'm like, that's stupid. Like, why would I not charge people? Like, every other coach in the world charges, honestly, quite a bit for their services, but you want me to give it away? And I guess I can tell you the truth. I didn't want to do it. So I went to Alicia and I was like, hey, I was praying about all this tiller stuff and felt like God was maybe telling me to like not charge people, but that's stupid, right? Like, you hate that, right? Like, I should not do that. And Alicia, being smarter and stronger willed and, of more faith, was like, oh yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Like, you can't charge people. I'm like, what? I'm the only person providing income for our family. Like, this is so dumb. But I was like, okay, we'll figure it out. So I raised my funds like a
Yeah,
missionary would,
yeah,
to give away my time to people that are hurting. And yeah, it makes no sense. And people are right to be a critic of that. But I don't know. I think that if God is going to send you in a direction, I don't think he's going to send you in that direction empty handed. And
yeah.
it's completely worked. Like, I've done this for 4.5 years, and I think I haven't gotten a full paycheck maybe twice, which is just absurd. I don't even know how it works. I'm not a good fundraiser. I've literally never asked anyone like, hey, would you please support my ministry? Like, I've
Mm.
literally never done it. God's just really
Wow.
made it happen. So You might be opening the floodgates for me.
Here we
You've
go.
sent two people for me
Here we
already, and there
go.
might be a lot of dads listening.
Yes.
And I don't care. Like, flood
Mm,
me. I
yeah.
I got to do this. I just have to do it.
There's a direct like trickle down from us as dads getting help in this area. So you have the 3 Ds: disappointed, dissatisfied, distressed. So basically
Mhm.
every dad listening right now is like,
Yeah.
yeah, can resonate to 2 out of the 3. Right? Um
Yeah.
and and if we can figure out with strength of story, God's story, his truths, our own story, the story that he's inviting us into. If we can live into like getting healed and helped in these areas, and then if a dad can bring some of these tools they learned from you to their kids, because our kids have expectation gaps for sure. And I was
Yeah.
actually going to ask about Harrison and like how does some of these tools how are they helping a 13-year-old son and like dad's son? Like coach obviously doesn't want you to play overly on the coach side, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
yeah, how has that gone and how have you seen some of these principles play into a teenager?
Man, great question. I first of all, I feel bad because my family does get sacrificed in this, and Alicia's so great, and her limited capacity to just suffer through having me a little bit less. If I'm going to coach a couple, it's probably going to be at night because
Yeah.
you're negotiating three people's schedule, and so we sacrifice a lot of time. And Anderson has sacrificed quite a bit of time with me. I don't share with him the specifics of like what guys are going through. I'm definitely not pointing out who these guys are, but I share a lot of these
Yeah.
tiller tips with him.
Yes.
He's at that age, like frankly, he's a little old for you know, the general society that, I can't say that word. Statistically
Yeah, sure.
speaking, he
Yeah.
should have already been exposed to pornography, but I have had so many conversations with him about it. And he's like, Dad, I don't want to talk about this. And I'm like, yeah, I know you don't. But the guys that are sitting in my office, uh,
Yeah.
so many of their expectation gaps, I can root cause to pornography addiction and, exposure that has warped their expectations. And so, like, if you can hear me on one thing,
Mm,
outside of like loving Jesus, it
yeah.
is just avoid the temptation. Like someone somewhere is going to show you this stuff,
Yep.
and that might seem pretty cool or innocent or not really that big of a deal, but it is that big of a deal. And, I just checked in with him the other day. He's probably going to hate that I'm talking about this.
Ah,
Um, I checked in the other day and he's like, Dad, I, I've not seen pornography, like I've never seen a naked lady. And I'm like,
praise God.
cool, man. Like,
Mm,
let's go. It's going to happen,
yes.
but stay, like, trust me on this one. Right.
And the
Um,
check-in is huge that we're just hearing like,
yeah.
are we dads that are just checking in on these topics that could be uncomfortable? Are we checking in?
Oh man. Yeah. I don't want to have that
Mhm.
conversation. I can't imagine how he feels. Like he gets all weird about it, but
Yep.
if I don't talk to him about it, who is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just one easy example, but the whole scenario is really hard because, like Alicia's really limited. Like life is really contained to being on the couch. She can only have the energy to get out of the house maybe one time a week. And often that's for a medical treatment or a doctor's appointment or something. And so I have to be a little extra for my son.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm doing it on like a little bit of borrowed time of like trying to be obedient to God. And it's a really hard thing to balance for sure. But I'm a cuddly dad. I know Alicia can't be overly cuddly, so I climb up into bed with him every night, and he's still okay with that at almost 14. I know it's going to change at some point, but until he's like, Dad, that's weird, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to
Oh my
give him
goodness.
everything I can.
It's funny. I wanted to ask you about that specific thing because you were in humor in your book, which it's hilariously written. I think one of the credits, like one of your friends or recommendations said, Jim Gaffigan style humor threaded
Mm,
throughout like the hardest thing you can ever imagine. And I agreed.
yeah.
I was like, yes. But I'd never heard the term. I give young dad advice all the time. I'm like, turn up the heat in your house, take your shirt off and
Mm.
cuddle with that little baby. Like, I'm like,
Oh yeah.
do it as often as possible. And a lot of dads have never heard that. Or you'll see a picture in the hospital, like a cold hospital room with the dad's wearing a sweatshirt, a hoodie, and the baby's on the outside of the sweatshirt. I'm like calling that dad up. I'm like, get your
Yeah.
shirt off, man, and put a blanket
Yeah.
over the baby.
Yeah.
So tell me,
Kangaroo time.
so I didn't know did you name it that or is that what it's actually called?
I think that's what it's actually called. We learned it in the NICU. I don't
Kangaroo
think I
time.
made it up. Yeah.
Or it's a yeah, it's whatever the hospital was at that was their thing. So
Yeah.
kangaroo time. I'm going to start using that term now. I am just such a fan, and the fact that you can still have like a relationship with your son that is like you can cuddle like that is such a like yes dads that have trust and intimacy with their kids in a way that man I have the morning hugs from my four girls are still like the most precious. I'm like
Ooh.
yes Lord help it last as long as possible. I
Yeah.
was going to ask in kind of closing though like tiller tips. I know you have these bite size for coaching for people in this expectation gap, in suffering, in loss, in disappointment, feeling dissatisfied, feeling distressed. You've got these tips that are just like nuggets. Could you hit us with a few of them as we kind of end our time?
Oh man, there's so many of them.
And for dads, the filter is again
Yeah.
shined for the dads. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. So one that comes to the top of my mind is forgiveness. Like forgiveness is like such a basic thing that we learned in kindergarten, but it's really hard to put into practice. And the simple tiller tip is that is did the other person who offended you, did they do it to you or did they do it for them? And if you can just take a moment to pause, like they probably didn't actually just do it with pure malicious intent, like I want to mess with this guy, but they were doing it for them. Maybe that's the first step of forgiveness. And
Yeah.
uh, man, there's been so many times as a dad, Anderson has done something super messed up that has just made me so mad. And like, frankly, in my flesh, it's hard to forgive him. I want to hold him accountable to that for a long time. Um, but I know he's not doing it to me. He's doing it for him. It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense to me why he would do it for him. Honestly, it doesn't make any sense to him either. He's just reacting and responding.
Sure.
So, but yeah, like to start there
Hmm.
in order to like then walk that journey of grace and forgiveness, I think is huge. So that's one. I'm trying to yeah, I record these things as they
Yeah.
like pop up, and it's just
Sure.
regular bits of coaching that I give like consistently. Like learning to not take yourself too seriously
Mhm.
is one of them. It's a thing I talk about with almost all of my guys. Like we are called to living lives that are free, alive, and interesting. And that thing that is hurting you, it makes it challenging, but it's not impossible. You can still be free, alive, and interesting. Just don't take yourself too seriously.
Yes.
It's, I know it's the hardest thing to do sometimes. And I promise you, like I have gotten lost in taking myself too seriously, but um, I, I can pull myself back and own it and maybe learn from it and do better next time. So
Yes.
that's one.
That's
Yeah, I don't
so
know. There's a
good.
bunch of
So
them.
good. Yeah. And of course, our dads can hop into tillercoaching.org. Do I have that site right?
That's right.
Tillercoaching.org
Yep.
and get more of those tips and your resources, your books. I was going to ask Jim, and well, first, just my gratitude for you and for living a life that is free, that is alive, that is interesting. Those are
Mm.
the three that you pray for and you're encouraging others, and you're doing it.
Oh wow.
Doing it. So
Mm.
thank you. Your joy is contagious, and joy makes no sense when I read through your book of the story.
Mm.
Although I see threads that you found it in all the moments versus just saying it, man, it's all hard. Like choosing joy. Thank you. I wanted to invite you, any last couple of minutes, words, anything last you wanted to share with us. And then would you say a prayer over all of us at Dad Awesome?
I'd love that. Jeff, thank you. I feel like you're my best friend now. Like this has been so good and you're really encouraging. Man, I guess the one thing that is kind of missing from the story is just that depression has carried through. Like there are seasons where my depression that I exhibited as a child has continued to bubble up. And a few years ago I had to take that really seriously. And I went down to Florida, down in your neck of the woods,
Yeah.
to check into a treatment center to get help with depression. And I was mortified about that. Like I was a pastor at a church and it's like I should be able to pray it away. I should be able to like trust the Lord enough, but I needed physical help for my physical problem. And I would just say that like if if that expectation gap in a listener's life is so real and it feels like the depression hole is just insurmountable, man, don't go it alone. It's actually one of the things I love most about my coaching is like, man, I don't know what I'm doing, but I have some of this experience. Like if I was a football coach, I know how to block and tackle, so I'm going to teach you how to block and tackle. Go over here and do this, right? And even just that one experience of humbling myself to go to this treatment center, um, I've I've helped guys do that exact same thing or similar things. I've helped get them in with counselors, psychiatrists. Like the toll of the expectation gap is real, and we shouldn't ignore that. Like I think we actually have to own reality on some level, and so um, I guess just to wrap up, and I'll pray here in a
Yeah.
moment. Like please don't go it alone. Like
Yes.
you can walk with someone else and it really can make all the difference. And um, yeah, I'm just really grateful to
Mm,
thank you for your kind words. It is a privilege to share my story every time and to, try to encourage anyone I can. It makes the sting of the story go away.
thank you.
Yeah,
Would
man.
you pray
Thank
for
you.
us?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Father, thank you for this time. This has been a sacred time for me to be able to share my story and to be able to connect with a new friend and, really friends. I have no idea who might be listening to this right now and what they might be going through, but um, life has a way of bringing expectation gaps. And really that is the reality of the enemy. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And that is us. He wants to destroy us in real ways and create rifts and separation between us and you, Father, and us and other people. And it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to take ourselves too seriously. We can trust you and learn to not take ourselves too seriously. I pray the free, alive, and interesting life over men that might be listening. I know dads out there are tired and weary and in need of real help. So, Lord, I just ask that your presence and your goodness would be on display through each of us, and that you would help us know that we are not alone. You've not forgotten us or forsaken us. So, Lord, we just need you. So, Lord, it is with a lot of anticipation uh, and hope that we just pray for you to provide. Lord, we love you and we need you, and I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.